government accountable for insufficient action on climate change. And the U.S. government enters partial shutdown as President Donald Trump and Democratic leaders blame each other for the failure to pass a stopgap spending bill. A quarter of U.S. federal agencies now closed without funding. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Brian Quinn. Here in France, yellow vest protests are underway for a sixth consecutive Saturday. On the streets of Paris, the numbers are far smaller than previous weeks, but hundreds are still out in support of the movement. The Palace of Versailles closed Saturday in anticipation of a demonstration there. On Friday, a driver died in southern France when their car hit a truck blocked by yellow vest protesters, that marking the 10th death linked to the movement. Protests have continued in spite of government efforts to meet their demands. France 24's Anka Ula is following the demonstrations here in Paris. She joins us live. Anka, what kind of numbers are you seeing out there today, and what's the mood like?
Well, Brian, the police said around midday that there's about 800 Yellow Vest demonstrators in Paris, in the capital today. That's far fewer than the 4,000 we saw last week, and just a fraction of the 10,000 we saw 2 weeks, which actually was the peak of the number of protesters that did descend on the capital. There's also a much smaller police presence. Last week we saw 8,000 police officers in Paris. This week there's 1,200 just about. But the situation has remained relatively calm for the time being. The police do have a good handle on it. The problem in the beginning, in the morning, was a bit of confusion as to where and when and how exactly these protests were going to begin. There was that question of, were they going to meet at Versailles, like you mentioned? There was also a question of, are they going to be on the Champs-Élysées like they have been in the past? At 9 a.m., one of the main voices of the Yellow Vest movement announced on a Facebook group that they were going to meet at Montmartre, which is where the Sacré-Cœur is, very touristic area in Paris. 11 million tourists go there a year to visit this neighborhood of Paris. What ended up happening is that there are two groups of Yellow Vesters in Paris. There's some here on the Champs-Élysées, which you can maybe see behind me on this big street, who stayed here, who didn't go to Montmartre because it was too last minute. There are the ones at Montmartre who stayed there as well, and who were moved by police around the city. It seems like they're all converging at Place de la Concorde, which is a big square in the center of Paris now. For the time being, it's been relatively calm, like I said, but the problem with this movement, as we've seen in past weeks, is that the reasons that people are participating in it are varied. People are here for a number of reasons, and the reasons they span the scale of radical to not radical. And so that's what we're hearing from some people who want to completely overhaul the French system entirely, who are saying taxation is too high, who are saying they won't negotiate with the government, to others who say the concessions that the government has made in dropping that fuel tax hike next year, in raising the minimum wage slightly, are a step in the right direction, but not quite enough. So they're planning on continuing through the holidays. They will be here every Saturday. We'll see if those numbers stay consistent, or if they're going to drop off even further.
Indeed, we'll be following that throughout the day. Thanks for that. That's France 24's Anka Ula out in Paris today following the Yellow Vest protest. Well, next, 2018 marked the hottest year in France since modern records began in 1900. The French Meteorological Service said Friday that 2018's average temperature of 14 degrees Celsius was 1.4 degrees higher than the average from 1981 to 2010. The year has been marked by droughts and floods across the country. We're joined now by Marie Toussaint. She's president of the climate justice organization Notre Affaire à tous. It's everyone's business. Perhaps in English we could translate that. Thank you so much for being with us, Marie. Tell us why the meteorological report is so important.
Well, it's not a surprise because we know that year after year the meteo and the climate is being hotter and hotter. What is really striking here is that it's not only 1 year like it was in 1900, but it's a lot more and more frequently that the temperature is higher. So it's just destroying all our ecosystems, but also our economy. If we take France, for instance, we just had a report which says that it costs more than $2.2 trillion each year for the last 20 years to French economy. So we really need to act both for nature and for our societies.
And your organization, along with some others, has launched this petition trying to push the French government to take real action on climate change. How do you see the government as having fallen short on its climate commitments?
Yeah. So our organization, Notre Affaire à tous, and Greenpeace France, Oxfam France, and la Fondation pour la Nature et l'Homme, we follow the government to tell them, okay, France has adopted quite high climate ambitions, but we're running short of time, and you don't act, and you just keep on postponing the realization of its goals. So right now, if we take the law, we're like completely out of the trajectory that was designed, and we know that the government can act. We know that the French state can act, and this government and the one before didn't do anything to really respect the law. Just like this, the citizens must respect the law. Well, the French state must respect it too. So that's what we're claiming now, saying you have solutions, you can invest in transportations, you can invest in housing, you can invest in renewables, and on all the sectors that are concerned by climate change and that can help blocking climate change. Then you're just off the road.
Indeed. A portion of government workers are now going without paychecks just days ahead of the Christmas holiday. Lawmakers are due back in Washington at noon Saturday to try and hash out an agreement. Nick Rushworth explains why President Trump has refused to sign a stopgap spending bill that would push the fight into 2019.
The United States government partially shut down, leaving around 800,000 federal employees working or furloughed without pay. The House of Representatives adjourned without reaching an agreement on funding late Friday, the sticking point in talks. U.S. President Donald Trump's border wall. During his campaign, he vowed that Mexico would bear the cost of erecting the barrier along the southern border. Now he's demanding $5.7 billion to fund construction. Democrats refuse to budge on the spending bill.
I don't think there is any appetite for funding a border wall that national security experts unanimously say wouldn't make our border safer.
Trump had said he'd be proud to shut down the government over border security, but as the shutdown seemed inevitable, he fell back on blaming Democrats.
Going to have a shutdown. There's nothing we can do about that because we need the Democrats to give us their votes. Let's get out, let's work together, let's be bipartisan, and let's get it done. The shutdown hopefully will not last long.
A shutdown means that roughly a quarter of federal agencies will close over the holiday period. National forests and parks will also close. It's the third partial shutdown this year, and unless either side is swayed before, the debate will be pushed to the new year when it's the Democrats who hold the majority in the House of Representatives.
Further proceedings on France 24's Nick Rushworth there. Well, that's it for this edition. Stay tuned to France 24 for more news and information coming up next.
Coming up on this week's show, reforms in Ethiopia have led to big changes in the country's media landscape. Our reporters meet with the former political prisoners who are now running newspapers and TV newsrooms. And African footballers carving out a career in Nepal. It's a destination for dozens of aspiring professional footballers from Africa every year. But it doesn't always work out as they'd hoped. We'll bring you a report from Kathmandu. And a Christmas market with a twist in Uganda. It's run by refugees with arts and crafts made by them. We'll take a closer look. Now, it's a new era for media in Ethiopia. In the past few weeks, 5 newspapers have been launched in the country, boosted by reforms rolled out by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. New TV and radio channels are also popping up, sometimes even featuring journalists who were previously jailed or exiled. But as you're about to see, this new wave of press freedom still has some restrictions. This report by Julia Steers, Nathalie Tissot, and Bastien Renouy.
1 month ago, the weekly paper Addis Mileto was launched. Today, the editorial team is about to close the 4th issue. Befakadu, a former blogger, spent several years in prison, and now he's the editor of the paper.
The only thing I never, but that didn't mean that I was not worried or afraid or hated to get into jail over and over again. But, eventually it paid off.
The public access channel in the Oromia region has a new editor too. After 16 years in exile, Mohammed came back with the goal of making OBN a genuine public service channel, one that doesn't take orders from the government. But recently, former intelligence and military officers were arrested, and that night, the channel, along with others, broadcast a damning documentary focusing on suspicions hanging over the officials.
That, of course, gives the impression that the state is using the media to persecute these individuals. Of course, that was a problem. But ultimately, in media competition, we have to present information on a timely manner.
There's more competition in print media, too. And Manyahin comes here to oversee the final printing of his weekly. At this state-owned press, newspapers that were once banned can now print new issues. But the laws that regulate the media are still strict.
Government doesn't officially censor private medias, but individual journalists censor themselves, fearing accusations based on the anti-terrorism law, which is still very restrictive.
Reforms of existing media laws are under review, but keeping new media houses afloat will also be an economic challenge. 2 papers that were recently launched have already folded.
Now to Tunisia, where a list of measures that aim to prevent citizens from leaving the country to join armed groups is coming under increased scrutiny. Under the rules, a citizen placed on the so-called S17 list by the government has to inform border police of their travel plans. Now, he or she could even be denied from leaving the country. Rights groups say the S17 list is an abuse of power and a human rights violation. Our correspondent in Tunisia sent us this report.
Nader is an engineer from a working-class neighborhood in Tunisia's capital. In 2012, after appearing in a friend's rap video, he learned that the government had placed him on a terrorism watch list.
This music video changed my life. It all began when someone posted photos from our video shoot on Facebook. The pictures, which show me holding a fake pistol, portrayed me as someone who belongs to an extreme leftist group planning a coup. 1 year later, I was stopped downtown for an ID check and found out I was listed under S17.
S17 was introduced by the Interior Ministry in 2013, part of efforts to prevent Tunisians from leaving to fight in conflict zones. In the meantime, many citizens like Nader found themselves banned from travel. As a result, he was unable to pursue studies in Italy as he'd planned. In October, Amnesty International denounced the arbitrary and abusive nature of S17 measures.
La procédure S17 est appliquée de manière arbitraire.
S17 measures are used arbitrarily since they have no legal basis. There's no judge or justified decision banning people from traveling, no indication of the proof used against these individuals, and no time limit on the restriction.
Utilisées contre ces personnes-là, et il n'y a pas de délai qui sont mis sur cette interdiction.
Since Amnesty International released its report, the Interior Ministry has started working on a revised version of S17.
Among its main tasks, the